Welcome to WHRO's Weekly Edition. I'm Doug Boynton. In this week's program, NOAA says batten down the hatches, it's hurricane time again. Baltimore welcomes back cruise ships. Ryan Murphy has what's next for Norfolk's cruise terminal.
Cruise Norfolk director Steve Kirkland says the city has hosted nearly 50,000 unexpected guests since Easter.
And the U.S. military goes underground, literally. Tunnel combat training is the new thing.
You have no idea how big the tunnel system is, or how small it is, how compressed it is. Where's the obstacles? Is there tripwires? Is there false doors?
But first, this news update from NPR. It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. A soldier remains in critical condition after being hurt in the U.S. project to deliver aid by sea to Gaza. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh says bad weather is one of the causes for the delay.
4 Army boats washed ashore during a storm over the weekend. 3 boats remain on the beach in Gaza with their crews on board. The Israeli Navy is working to free them. The pier itself was damaged by weather Tuesday and is being removed for repairs that will last at least a week, says Pentagon spokeswoman Sabrina Singh.
We believe that given the time of year, we will be able to re-anchor this pier and it will be able to be operational, and hopefully weather conditions won't hinder it anymore.
It's been a rocky start for the military project to run a mobile pier to provide aid to the starving population of Gaza. 1 soldier remains in critical condition and 2 others were injured on the MV Bonavides, which is based in Hampton Roads. Sailors from the Army 7th Transportation Brigade left Fort Eustis in March. The Pentagon has set no end date for the operation. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
NOAA just dropped their hurricane season forecast, and spoiler alert, it's going to be a doozy, they say. It could be the worst in decades. WHRO's Catherine Hafner fills us in.
NOAA predicts up to 25 named storms this year, including up to 13 hurricanes and 7 major hurricanes. That's the most the agency has ever forecast ahead of the season. NOAA Administrator Rick Spinrad says they often mention past hurricanes as a benchmark, but
past is not necessarily prologue when it comes to the hurricanes of the future. This season is looking to be an extraordinary one in a number of ways.
For instance, ocean temperatures are warmer than ever. A weather pattern called La Niña is also on the way, which can fuel storms. Federal officials recently visited Norfolk on a hurricane awareness tour. They pleaded with Virginians to prepare for storms ahead of time. Hurricane season starts June 1st and lasts through November. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Hampton residents got another opportunity to tell city officials their thoughts on the city's Natural Infrastructure Resiliency Plan. WHRO's Nick McNamara reported the story.
The plan is the work of the Charlottesville-based nonprofit Green Infrastructure Center in partnership with Hampton. Key points range from finding ways to protect wetlands to creating an urban forestry program and increasing tree canopy coverage in the city. Lauren Doran with the nonprofit says their data allows for strategies that target projects in the most disadvantaged neighborhoods.
We have a map of the heat and equity and tree planting across the city, so looking at where are the hottest places and where are the lowest income places. And then where can we plant trees there that would mitigate that heat.
Resident input will be included in the final report when it comes to the Hampton City Council for adoption in August. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
After a WHRO investigation, we are learning the feds, the Department of Justice, is looking into bullying incidents among Norfolk public school students. WHRO's Ryan Murphy has more.
Families and advocates for Latino students who say they were assaulted at school due to their race say they were approached by federal investigators after WHRO aired their story in January. The Department of Justice would not comment on whether it's investigating Norfolk Public Schools or associated violence. Separately, another Norfolk parent, Melissa Corrigan, says her son was a freshman at Norview High School when he was harassed and eventually assaulted for being transgender. Corrigan says she was interviewed by an investigator in March.
The main things that they're looking for is, did Norfolk Public Schools follow protocol, existing federal and state protocol and guidance for how to handle these instances of violence.
It's not clear if these probes are related. Norfolk Public Schools told WHRO they were not aware of a Department of Justice investigation. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
And we should mention Norfolk Public Schools is a member of WHRO, which holds the license to the WHRO stations. Hampton City Council said adios jail. They unanimously voted to sell the Hampton Roads Regional Jail to Portsmouth. It was the last of the 5 member cities to give approval to the deal. WHRO's Nick McNamara reported the story.
Hampton will make about $8 million from the $31.5 million sale. Officials plan on using that sum to buy into the Western Tidewater Regional Jail in Suffolk. That facility has already been housing Hampton inmates during its downtown jail renovations. Vice Mayor Jimmy Gray says this was not ideal but necessary due to staffing shortages at Hampton Roads Regional Jail.
It was just a matter of time, but we were fortunate to be able to follow up and get this immediate partnership with the Western Tidewater Regional Jail to serve our needs, at a cost actually that, really was beneficial to the city.
Portsmouth is set to take possession of Hampton Roads Regional Jail on July 1st. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
Talk about a marathon. The Elizabeth River Restoration Project might finally wrap up after more than a decade. As WHRO's Catherine Hafner reports, it's the state budget coughing up almost $4 million to get the job done.
Money Point in Chesapeake used to be a hotspot for wood treatment plants. Industry used a tar-based substance to treat lumber coming out of places like the Dismal Swamp. By the early 2000s, the ecosystem was suffering. Here's Marjorie Mayfield Jackson with the Elizabeth River Project.
It was infamous for the deformity of the fish and the cancer in the fish, and it seemed like an area that we just had to forget about and give up.
But the nonprofit developed a rallying cry, the goo must go. They eventually led the region's first voluntary cleanup of toxic sediment.
We went on to remove 36 million pounds of severe contamination.
Now, the last phase at Money Point is finally moving forward, led by the Army Corps. That's possible because of the new state funds, along with $11 million from Congress. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
This past Memorial Day, the country remembered our fallen servicemen and women. Nearly 1,500 Virginians were killed in the Vietnam War. Some 230,000 served in it. During the past year, a group of Vietnam veterans, most in their 70s, shared their stories and photos through an exhibit at the Virginia War Memorial. There are plans to bring it to more Virginians. We get more from Virginia Public Radio's Pamela D'Angelo.
The exhibit, 50 Years Beyond, the Vietnam Veterans Experience, features 50 Virginia veterans, some of whom have since passed. And while they shared a history of the Vietnam War, the stories they tell are very different.
And how did you enter into service in the military?
Kicking and screaming.
I've always wanted to be in the Army, always.
That's Florence Dunn, who served in the U.S. Women's Army Corps, and Paul Maynor, who served in the U.S. Army. Both are part of a 20-minute film with some of the veterans in the exhibit and their personal photos taken while serving in Vietnam.
And now we are going to give it an extra life by finding different places, especially around Virginia, but hopefully, who knows, even beyond, where we can display these images and stories of 50 different Virginians that served in Vietnam.
Clay Mountcastle served in the Army for 20 years. He's the director of the Virginia War Memorial. His plan is to reach out to veteran care centers, schools, and hospitals as potential stops for the exhibit.
What's at the heart of this exhibit are just the experiences and stories of those veterans themselves, from going into the military, from their experience in Vietnam to coming home from Vietnam, and then living the past 50 years as a Vietnam veteran.
I wanted to be a cook because that's what I did. Before I went, I was short on a cook, and I wanted to be a cook. Staff Sergeant Wilson, never forget him. He told me that he'd rather have a sister that was in a house of ill repute, he used another word, than to have a brother that was a cook in the Marine Corps, and I wasn't going to be a real cook.
Calvin David Brown became a Marine Corps correctional specialist. Then there's the shock of arrival. Walter Roberts was dropped in the jungle to replace another doctor.
There I am, standing there in them crisp new jungle fatigues and nice shiny boots, and these guys are all nasty looking and scrungy and everything. And they looked at me and they said, "I sure hope you're as good as the last doc we had."
Along with the War Memorial staff, 2 veterans were behind the project. Videographer Pamela Vines and Laura Hatcher, who photographed the 50 portraits, 6 of whom were women. Here's Hatcher.
I was just as surprised as when I walked into the exhibit to see how beautiful they were, especially with the colors and the quotes and the in-country picture that accompanied it. Several generations can appreciate it because if you notice, there's a QR code in the bottom left-hand corner. So on opening night, it was so neat to see the grandchildren of the veteran with their phone, knowing fine well granddad can't do that, right? Figure out what a QR code is. And so the grandkids got the QR code and they're watching the video while the veteran grandfather is getting his picture taken. That was cool.
I know that a lot of Vietnam veterans have really appreciated this exhibit and their family members have appreciated it. So that's why we know that we have to continue to find ways to have it on display.
The War Memorial is working with the Pentagon and some of the Virginia Veterans Care Centers to bring the exhibit to those locations later this year. Along with the traveling exhibit, the War Memorial maintains a permanent exhibit about the Vietnam War, as well as exhibits on veterans of other wars and conflicts. From Richmond, I'm Pamela D'Angelo.
Almost a dozen Carnival and Royal Caribbean cruises made a surprise detour to Norfolk after the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore collapsed in March. They've returned to Charm City now. WHRO's Ryan Murphy reports on what's next for Norfolk.
Cruise Norfolk director Steve Kirkland says the city has hosted nearly 50,000 unexpected guests since Easter as cruise passengers scheduled to arrive and depart in Baltimore wound up in Norfolk instead. It's kept bus services busy with nearly 500 buses shuttling passengers between the 2 cities. But Kirkland says the unexpected cruise ship visits have not delayed Norfolk's planned expansion of its cruise terminal. Demolition is still on track for the end of June, and construction should start in August. Norfolk is set to start handling large cruises year-round once the expansion is completed in January. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
A federal judge turned thumbs down on a request by conservative interest groups to halt construction of Dominion Energy's wind farm off the coast of Virginia Beach. WHRO's Catherine Hafner has the update.
The coalition, including the Heartland Institute and Committee for Constructive Tomorrow, filed suit against the project earlier this year. They say the Biden administration did not properly consider its potential impacts on endangered whales. The lawsuit will move forward this fall, but a federal judge says construction doesn't need to stop before then. Here's what Jeremy Slayton with Dominion previously told WHRO.
They're trying to raise these issues, but they have no merit. We're quite confident that this project is not going to have adverse impacts on marine life.
Scientists say there's no evidence linking whale deaths to offshore wind. Dominion installed the first monopile for the project last week, nearly 30 miles off the oceanfront. They'll pause construction after October to protect migrating whales. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
It's a dead heat. President Biden and former President Trump are tied at 42% each in Virginia, which could be a battleground state this year. That comes from a new poll from Roanoke College. Virginia Public Radio's Michael Pope has the numbers.
Joe Biden and Donald Trump are both underwater in Virginia, with higher unfavorable than favorable numbers. That's according to a new poll from Roanoke College, which shows a muddled race for president in Virginia, which might end up being a battleground state in 2024. Here's Harry Wilson, senior political analyst at the Institute for Policy and Opinion Research at Roanoke College.
Normally, we would say an incumbent president with 59% unfavorable rating should be way behind in the polls, but he's tied in this case because his opponent is also viewed very unfavorably.
The poll also shows memories of the Trump years are very positive compared to feelings about the Biden years. Democrats are not all that positive about the Biden years, but 9 out of 10 Republicans view the Trump years as mostly good.
Republicans were really gung-ho about the Trump years. They see the Trump years as a very positive time. And obviously Democrats don't, but only half of Democrats see the Biden years as really good times.
This is the first time that the Roanoke College poll has ever shown presidential candidates in a tie. I'm Michael Pope.
A lot has changed since 1954, especially for Suffolk public school bus drivers. One driver who's basically seen it all is finally hanging up his keys this spring after an epic 70-year career. WHRO's Nick McNamara has the full story.
Sitting behind the wheel of a yellow school bus, Rutherford Whitfield has seen more children's faces than he can recall. Now 85, he started driving for the district when he was a high school student himself, just 16 years old. Whitfield says the secret to his longevity as a driver has been patience and respect. He remembers running into a woman who had misbehaved back when she was a student on his bus.
And she said, all them times you had me to sweep your bus because I was naughty. I have finished college now, got my master's, and I'm now a guidance counselor in Portsmouth. I was shocked. I was really surprised.
Though officially retiring, Whitfield plans to continue as a substitute driver come the fall. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms.
A local pilot is now a movie star thanks to a new Blue Angels documentary. WHRO's Steve Walsh reports that the film aims to show the Navy's elite demonstration squad like you've never seen them before.
Lieutenant Commander Chris Kapuscinski first saw the Blue Angels at an air show as a teenager. It inspired him to become a naval aviator. He applied 3 times before he was selected to join the squadron.
It's a very humbling experience right out the gate. Extremely humbling and very rewarding, but man, it's a fire hose of information, fire hose of stuff that you've never done before.
Flying an F-18 Super Hornet is always physically demanding. The Blue Angels add weight to the stick to help them fly within 18 inches of each other.
So imagine holding a kettlebell or a dumbbell, right, in not a full curled position, but almost like level with the ground, and holding that for about 45 minutes. That's what it's like every single flight.
Kapuscinski just left a 2-year tour with the Blue Angels. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
You can catch the new Blue Angels flick in theaters or stream it on Amazon. The potential for decreasing property values concerns some residents in Hampton after the city proposed short-term rental rules. Local researchers, though, don't envision a big impact. WHRO's Nick McNamara reported the story.
The regulations would streamline the approval process for new short-term rentals in Hampton. Prospective owners would have to pay an application and inspection fee rather than go through 2 public hearings. They also institute proximity limits and cap short-term rentals to 1% of residences in the city's 51 short-term rental zones. Old Dominion researcher Lei Zhang studies the impact of Airbnbs in Hampton Roads. She says when a home sells with an active Airbnb nearby, the sale price typically increases less than 0.5%.
It's not a huge impact, but if you're thinking about an average house, $300,000, it has some impact. If you're surrounded by many Airbnb listings, so this will be a larger impact.
Hampton City Council will consider the new regulations June 12th. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
The U.S. military is getting serious about tunnel warfare training. Fighting underground isn't new. It's been around for centuries, but it has become a bigger deal lately. The complex tunnels built by Hamas in Gaza have put a spotlight on this super risky combat style. Jay Price reports for the American Homefront Project.
Geopolitical foes like China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia have long built tunnels and bunkers to shield their militaries, and in recent years Hamas and other groups have followed suit. So the U.S. military has responded, building tunnel warfare training facilities like this one at Fort Liberty. With nearly 2/3 of a mile of disorienting twists and turns, hatches, and doorways. Shot fired! In this exercise, a small Special Forces team slipped into a house, but their main target fled into a tunnel entrance hidden in a back room. They tossed a flashbang, a grenade designed to disorient. The The soldier playing the role of the high-value target scrambled farther, trying to lure them into a smaller tunnel where they'd be easier to kill. Eventually, though, they found another entrance behind them and caught him. The role player was a staff sergeant named Adrian. The Army allows special operations soldiers to be identified only by their first names. He said soldiers need a really good reason to enter tunnels where they're usually at a disadvantage.
You have no idea how big the tunnel system is or how small it is, how compressed it is. Where's the obstacles? Is there tripwires? Is there false doors?
Mike Murray oversees the sprawling bases training ranges. He helped plan the elaborate newer section of the tunnels, which was finished in 2020.
I'm going to try to make it as complicated as possible.
Some tunnels open into spacious rooms that could be used for, say, a command center, medical treatment, or storing arms. Others squeeze down until you're crawling.
Now you're on your hands and knees, complete darkness. Maybe your elbows are banging the side of the walls.
There's good reason the U.S. and other nations are doing more of this kind of training, says Daphne Richmond Barak, author of the book Underground Warfare and an assistant professor at Reichman University in Israel.
For the last 2 decades, this tactic has indeed become more popular with non-state actors.
For groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, and al-Qaeda that the U.S. and other nations designate as terrorists, going underground helps them blunt the technological and numerical advantages of the militaries hunting them.
And it is spreading as a global threat, and we witness tunnel warfare on virtually every single battlefield since 9/11.
Underground warfare goes back to, well, cave dwellers, but perhaps the best-known cases in recent history were in Vietnam, where the Viet Cong dug more than 100 miles of tunnels. John Keaveney was sent into those complexes. He was one of the U.S. troops known as tunnel rats.
You learn to use your senses because it's very dark. And so, you learn to smell things and listen good.
He crawled into tunnels more than 50 times. Waiting inside, he found booby traps, snakes, spiders, and sometimes enemy fighters. The stress contributed to what he now knows was PTSD.
I came home, I didn't know what was wrong with me. I thought I just spent too much time in the tunnels.
Richmond Barak, the professor, says those psychological effects are a key reason troops need to be trained for fighting underground.
You lose your sense of space, your sense of direction, your sense of time, and the confinement and nature of this darkness really takes you by surprise.
The U.S. military is also developing technology like robots that can explore and map tunnel systems and communication devices that can work underground. But Richmond Barak says there's no substitute for training exercises like the one at Fort Liberty, where troops can get used to how their minds and bodies react to one of the toughest forms of combat. I'm Jay Price reporting.
This story was produced by the American Homefront Project. That's a public media collaboration that reports on American military life and veterans. You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. Thanks this week to Catherine Hafner, Steve Walsh, Ryan Murphy, Kate Nowak, and Nick McNamara. VPR's Pamela D'Angelo and Michael Hope also lent a hand, along with Jay Price from the American Homefront Project. Let's not forget Connor Worley. He produced today's broadcast. Don't forget, you can always binge full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed. And for the latest news, hit up WHRO.org or check out the WHRO Reports podcast feed. From the whole gang at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton. Stay safe. Be well.